By the time James asked me to pass the orange juice, I'd already written our divorce in my head. 3 times, all in different genres. The first was a tragic literary piece where I'd weep gracefully into my coffee cup. The second was a thriller where I'd poison his eggs Benedict. The third was a comedy where I'd simply disappear, leaving behind only a note that read, "Gone to find myself." Check the fiction section. Before we dive deeper into the story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. I handed him the juice without looking up from my laptop screen, where I'd been pretending to work on my novel for the past 6 months. The cursor blinked at me mockingly, as empty and rhythmic as James's chewing. Across the granite island of our perfect kitchen, my husband consumed his breakfast with the same methodical precision he applied to architectural blueprints. Measure twice, chew once, swallow without tasting. "Mum, are you even listening?" Lily's voice cut through the morning silence like a scalpel through tissue paper. At 23, my daughter had perfected the art of exasperation, treating conversations with me like mandatory community service. "Of course, sweetheart." I minimized my document, all blank pages, and gave her my full attention. "You were telling me about your promotion." "No, Mother. I was asking if you'd finished your book yet. You know, the one you've been working on for the past 2 years. She made air quotes with her manicured fingers, the same dismissive gesture I'd seen James use when colleagues asked about my writing. The kitchen fell silent except for the hum of our Sub-Zero refrigerator, that monument to suburban success that cost more than my first car. Everything in this house was perfect. The marble countertops that showed every fingerprint, the custom cabinets that held dishes we never used, the breakfast nook windows that framed our neighbors' equally perfect lives like a reality show I'd never auditioned for. "Writing takes time," I said, closing the laptop. "Real writing, anyway." James finally looked up from his phone, where he'd been scrolling through emails with the intensity of a day trader. "Maybe you should consider taking that creative writing class at the community center. Sometimes structure helps with productivity." The word hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. Productivity. As if creativity could be measured in quarterly reports and profit margins. As if the stories brewing in my head could be blueprinted and constructed like one of his sterile office buildings. I'd been Helen Carter, aspiring novelist, for longer than I'd been Helen Carter, architect's wife. But somewhere between PTA meetings and dinner parties, where I smiled politely while James's colleagues discussed their latest projects, I'd become Helen Carter, woman who used to write, past tense, like something that had died quietly in the night. "The Hendersons are having another barbecue this weekend," James continued, already moving on from my creative failures. "Bill wants to discuss the Morrison project. You'll need to make that spinach dip everyone likes." Everyone. As if the entire neighborhood had voted on my spinach dip, as if this was my greatest contribution to society. Helen Carter, wife, mother, maker of adequate appetizers. I nodded and smiled, the same automatic response I'd perfected over 25 years of marriage. "Yes, dear, of course, dear. Whatever you need, dear." The words tasted like sawdust in my mouth. After they left, James to his office downtown, Lily to her marketing job at a firm that actually appreciated her ideas, I sat alone in our perfect kitchen, surrounded by the debris of their perfect lives. Coffee cups with lipstick stains and newspaper sections folded to hide anything remotely interesting. The morning light streamed through our perfect windows, illuminating dust motes that danced with more freedom than I'd felt in years. I opened my laptop again and stared at the blank page. The cursor blinked, waited, judged. Instead of writing, I found myself on Facebook, scrolling through the lives of people I barely remembered from high school. Sarah Peterson had published her 3rd romance novel. Michelle Torres was teaching creative writing at a university in Colorado. Even Janet Mullins, who'd barely passed English, was running a successful blog about urban gardening. They were all doing something, creating something, being something other than decorative. I closed the laptop and walked upstairs to our bedroom, past the family photos that lined the hallway like evidence of a life I'd somehow forgotten to live. Helen and James at their wedding, young and optimistic. Helen holding baby Lily, exhausted but glowing. Helen at James's promotion party, smiling beside him while he shook hands with important men in expensive suits. In every photo, I looked smaller, more faded, like I was slowly disappearing, one family milestone at a time. In our walk-in closet, large enough to house a family of 4 in most countries, I pulled out the suitcase I'd bought for a book conference I'd never attended. The tags were still attached. I'd told James it was for a weekend getaway that never materialized, like most of my plans. I packed methodically, the way James ate breakfast, practical clothes, nothing too fancy. My laptop, of course, though I wasn't sure why. A few books, including the dog-eared copy of On Writing that had inspired me to start my novel in the first place. Some photographs, but not the family ones. Just a few from college, when I'd still believed I could be anything. The jewelry box sat open on my dresser, displaying the accumulation of 25 years of obligatory gifts. Anniversary earrings I'd never worn. A necklace from James that looked exactly like something his secretary would pick out. The engagement ring that had once symbolized forever, but now felt like evidence of a crime I'd committed against my younger self. I left it all. In the kitchen, I wrote a check for the mortgage and left it on the counter. Added a note about Lily's dental appointment next Tuesday and the fact that the garbage disposal was making that sound again. Practical things, the kind of details that had consumed my life while my dreams quietly suffocated in suburban silence. I didn't write a goodbye letter. What was there to say? That I'd become a ghost in my own life? That I'd spent so many years being what everyone else needed that I'd forgotten who I was underneath? That their casual dismissal of my dreams had finally killed something essential inside me? Instead, I simply picked up my suitcase and walked out the front door of the house that had never felt like home, despite 20 years of mortgage payments and careful decorating. The neighborhood was quiet, as always. Perfect lawns stretched in every direction, each one maintained by services that came on predetermined schedules. Nothing spontaneous, nothing unexpected. My car started on the first try, a small miracle that felt like approval from the universe. As I backed out of the driveway, I caught a glimpse of Mrs. Henderson peering through her kitchen window, probably wondering why Helen Carter was leaving home at 10:30 on a Tuesday morning with a suitcase. Let her wonder. Let them all wonder. The silence followed me out of the driveway. For once, I didn't mind. It was finally mine. The extended stay America on Route 9 smelled like industrial carpet cleaner and broken dreams, which seemed appropriate for a woman who'd just abandoned her life like a half-finished crossword puzzle. I'd been living there for 3 weeks, long enough to memorize the continental breakfast schedule and develop a nodding relationship with the night clerk, who looked like he'd given up on life around the same time I had. My suite featured a kitchenette with a 2-burner stove that worked sporadically and a view of the parking lot where traveling salesmen and people escaping their own suburban prisons came to reinvent themselves, or at least pretend to. I'd become one of them. Helen Carter, woman in transition. It sounded like a support group I wasn't ready to join. James had called exactly once, 2 days after I'd left, not to ask if I was okay, or to beg me to come home, but to inform me that Lily's dental appointment had been rescheduled, and could I please remember to update the insurance information. Even my abandonment had been reduced to administrative details. I'd started writing again, though. Real writing, not the careful prose I'd been producing in our perfect kitchen while trying not to disturb anyone's morning routine. This was raw, honest, angry writing. It was Tuesday morning, and I was sitting in the lobby with my laptop and a cup of coffee that tasted like it had been filtered through someone's gym socks, when I made the mistake of checking the Maple Heights neighborhood Facebook group. I'd forgotten I was still a member, forgotten that our subdivision had its own digital gossip mill, where neighbors shared everything from lost cat alerts to passive-aggressive complaints about property maintenance. The post that caught my attention had been shared by Patricia Morrison, the self-appointed queen of local social media and owner of 3 small dogs with anxiety disorders. The headline made my coffee taste even worse. Local architect finds love and success with new business partner. The accompanying photo showed James and a woman I didn't recognize cutting a ribbon at what appeared to be an office opening. She was younger than me, of course, with the kind of sleek blonde hair that required professional maintenance and a smile that suggested she'd never spent 25 years making spinach dip for other people's parties. The caption identified her as Jennifer Walsh, James's brilliant new business partner, who had brought fresh energy and innovative ideas to Carter and Associates. Carter and Associates. The firm that had been Carter Architecture for 15 years, until apparently Jennifer Walsh had arrived with her fresh energy and innovative ideas and earned herself equal billing. I scrolled through the comments, each one a small knife twist in my chest. They make such a great team. So inspiring to see successful professionals supporting each other. James looks happier than I've seen him in years. Happier than he'd looked in years. While married to me. The next post made my hands shake so badly I nearly dropped my laptop. It was from the Maple Heights Moms blog, a vicious little publication run by women who'd turned neighborhood gossip into performance art. The headline read, "The Mystery of the Missing Mom. What Really Happened to Helen Carter?" I clicked on it with the same morbid fascination that makes people slow down at car accidents. Neighbors are buzzing about the sudden disappearance of Helen Carter, wife of successful architect James Carter and mother of marketing professional Lily Carter. Helen, who had been working on a novel for several years, though no one seems to know what it was about or if she ever finished it, apparently packed up and left without explanation 3 weeks ago. She was always a bit dramatic, says one neighbor who preferred to remain anonymous. Always talking about her writing, like she was the next Stephen King or something. I think she finally realized it wasn't going to happen and had some kind of breakdown. James Carter declined to comment, but sources close to the family suggest that Helen had been struggling with what one friend called unrealistic expectations about her creative abilities and had become increasingly difficult to live with. She was always complaining that nobody took her seriously, the friend continued, but honestly, she'd been working on the same book for years and never seemed to make any progress. At some point, you have to accept reality, right? The Carter family asks for privacy during this difficult time. James continues to focus on his thriving architectural firm, recently expanded with the addition of talented partner Jennifer Walsh. Daughter Lily has returned to work after taking a brief leave to deal with the family situation. We wish the Carter family well and hope Helen finds whatever she's looking for. I read it 3 times, each pass revealing new layers of humiliation. They'd turned my disappearance into a cautionary tale about middle-aged women who couldn't accept their limitations. I was the crazy lady who'd thought she could write, the delusional housewife who'd finally snapped when reality came calling. The anonymous friend who'd provided those devastating quotes could have been any of a dozen women I'd considered close enough to confide in over the years. Women who'd nodded sympathetically when I'd talked about my writing struggles, who'd asked politely about my progress at book clubs and coffee dates. Women who'd apparently been discussing my failures behind my back like a particularly interesting case study in suburban delusion. I closed the laptop and walked back to my room, past the traveling salesman and other refugees from normal life. In the bathroom mirror, I looked like exactly what I was, a 50-year-old woman who'd run away from home and was living in a hotel that charged by the week. My hair needed cutting, my clothes needed pressing, and my eyes had the hollow look of someone who'd just discovered that her entire life had been a joke she wasn't in on. But then something shifted. Maybe it was the anger, or maybe it was the coffee finally kicking in, but I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Pure, focused rage. Not the quiet resentment I'd been carrying around like a low-grade fever, but clean, sharp fury that cut through the self-pity like a scalpel. They wanted to know what my book was about. They wanted to dismiss my writing as the desperate fantasy of a woman who couldn't accept reality. I opened my laptop and started typing. The words came like water through a broken dam, fast and unstoppable. I wrote about suburban marriages that looked perfect from the outside, but felt like elegant prisons on the inside. I wrote about women who'd traded their dreams for security and found themselves slowly disappearing. I wrote about husbands who treated their wives like household appliances, useful, reliable, and easily replaced when something newer and more efficient came along. I wrote about James, though I called him Richard. I wrote about his methodical breakfast routine, his casual dismissal of anything that didn't contribute to his professional success, his ability to make me feel invisible while sitting 3 feet away. I wrote about the neighbors who'd judged my writing without ever reading a word of it, who'd turned my disappearance into entertainment for their social media feeds. I wrote for 6 hours straight, stopping only when my fingers cramped and my eyes burned from staring at the screen. When I finally looked up, I had 12,000 words of the sharpest, most honest prose I'd ever produced. It wasn't the careful, literary novel I'd been attempting for years. It was something rawer and more dangerous, a suburban satire that cut close to the bone. I called it The Blueprint. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of writing, editing, and research into self-publishing platforms. I'd given up on the traditional route years ago after collecting enough rejection letters to wallpaper a small bathroom. But the publishing world had changed, and now I could bypass the gatekeepers who decided my stories weren't commercial enough. I designed a simple cover using a stock photo of a perfect suburban street. I wrote a description that promised readers a darkly funny look at the secrets hiding behind manicured lawns and perfect marriages. I set the price at $2.99 and hit publish before I could lose my nerve. Then I waited. The first review appeared 3 days later. Brutal and hilarious, this author clearly knows her subject matter intimately. 5 stars. Then another. I couldn't put it down. Every suburban wife needs to read this book. And another. Finally, someone who tells the truth about what it's really like to be married to a successful man who thinks you're decoration. Within a month, The Blueprint had sold 5,000 copies and was being discussed in online book clubs and suburban mom Facebook groups across the country. Readers were sharing quotes, recommending it to friends, and writing reviews that suggested I'd somehow managed to tell their stories too. The breakthrough came when a popular book blogger with 500,000 followers featured The Blueprint in her weekly roundup of must-read indie fiction. This author has written the revolutionary road for the social media age, she wrote. Sharp, funny, and devastating. Sales exploded. I was selling 1,000 copies a day, climbing the Amazon bestseller charts, getting interview requests from podcasts and online magazines. The extended stay America suddenly felt less like exile and more like a writer's retreat. It was a Tuesday morning exactly 2 months after I'd left Maple Heights when I got the call from Patricia Morrison. I almost didn't answer. I'd been screening calls from numbers I recognized, but curiosity got the better of me. Helen? Her voice was tight with something that might have been panic. Helen, we need to talk. Hello, Patricia. How are the dogs? Never mind the dogs. Helen, did you write a book? I smiled, looking out at the parking lot where a new crop of refugees had arrived to reinvent their lives. Yes, Patricia, I did. Oh my God, Helen. People are saying, they're saying it's about us, about the neighborhood, about... She lowered her voice to a whisper. about James and that woman. By the time they realized who the book was really about, it was already on the bestseller list. The apartment I rented with my first royalty check was a vast improvement over the extended stay America, though it still smelled faintly of other people's lives. It was a 2-bedroom unit in a converted Victorian house, with hardwood floors that creaked in interesting ways and windows that actually opened. The landlord, a retired English professor named Margaret, had read the blueprint and offered me the place with the enthusiasm of someone welcoming a literary celebrity to the neighborhood. I haven't laughed that hard at suburban hypocrisy since the Stepford Wives, she'd told me while showing me the kitchen. You've got a gift for finding the absurd in the mundane. The gift, it turned out, was marketable. 3 months after publication, the blueprint had sold 50,000 copies and been optioned by a production company that specialized in dark comedies about dysfunctional families. I'd been interviewed by NPR, featured in Publishers Weekly, and invited to speak at a conference about women's voices in contemporary fiction. Helen Carter, author. It had a nice ring to it. I was sitting at my new desk, a real writer's desk, not a kitchen counter, working on my second book when the email arrived. The subject line made my coffee taste suddenly bitter. Congratulations from your biggest fan. It was from Lily. Mom, I can't believe you didn't tell me about the book. I just finished reading it and I'm so proud of you. I had no idea you were working on something so good. I know I haven't been very supportive of your writing over the years, and I'm sorry about that. I guess I didn't understand what you were trying to do. Can we talk soon? I miss you, and I think there are some things we need to discuss about Dad and, about everything. Love, Lily P.S. Jennifer Walsh called me yesterday asking if I knew how to contact you. She seemed really upset about something. I stared at the email for a long time, trying to decode the layers of meaning beneath Lily's careful words. She'd read the book. She knew what it was really about. And, apparently, Jennifer Walsh was upset. Good. Before I could second-guess myself, I opened a new browser tab and searched for James Carter architect Jennifer Walsh. The results were illuminating. The first hit was a local business journal article titled, Carter & Associates Wins Architect of the Year Award. The photo showed James accepting a crystal trophy, with Jennifer beaming beside him in a dress that probably cost more than I used to spend on clothes in 6 months. The article praised their innovative partnership and fresh approach to residential design. Carter credits much of the firm's recent success to the creative input of his business partner, Jennifer Walsh. She's brought a new perspective to everything we do, Carter says. I can't imagine the firm without her now. Creative input. I wondered if that was what they were calling it. The second hit was more interesting. A real estate listing for a house on Elm Street, 3 blocks from my old neighborhood. The listing agent was Jennifer Walsh, and the property description mentioned that it had been personally designed by award-winning architect James Carter as a showcase of modern suburban living. I clicked through the photo gallery, and my hand started shaking. The house was almost identical to the one I'd shared with James for 20 years. Same floor plan, same granite countertops, same custom cabinets. Even the color scheme was similar, soft grays and whites that James had always favored. He'd built Jennifer a replica of our life. The listing had been marked sold 6 months ago, right around the time the blueprint had started climbing the bestseller charts. I wondered if they'd celebrated the purchase while discussing my latest Amazon reviews. I spent the rest of the afternoon falling down internet rabbit holes, piecing together the timeline of James and Jennifer's relationship through social media posts and business announcements. They'd been partners for 2 years, but the photos suggested their relationship had become personal long before it became official. There was James at a charity gala, with Jennifer as his colleague. James and Jennifer cutting the ribbon at a client's grand opening. James and Jennifer accepting an award for sustainable design, standing just a little too close to be purely professional. The final piece of evidence came from Jennifer's Instagram account, which she'd apparently forgotten to make private. 3 months ago, she'd posted a photo of a breakfast table set for two, with the caption, "Sunday mornings are the best with my favorite architect." The table was the same granite I'd eaten breakfast at for 20 years, but the place settings were different, more expensive, more stylish. Everything was an upgrade, including the woman serving the orange juice. I closed the laptop and walked to my kitchen, where I made myself a sandwich and ate it standing up, looking out at the street where normal people were living their normal lives. A jogger passed by, followed by a woman walking 3 small dogs that reminded me of Patricia Morrison's Anxious Pack. Somewhere in this city, people were falling in love and getting divorced and writing books and giving up on dreams and starting over. And somewhere, James and Jennifer were probably having dinner at the table where I used to sit invisibly, discussing their successful firm and their beautiful house and their bright future together. Maybe they'd even talked about my book, laughed about how I'd turned our failed marriage into a bestseller. The thought should have hurt more than it did. Instead, I felt something cold and calculating settle in my chest. They'd gotten everything they wanted: success, love, a perfect suburban life built on the foundation of my discarded dreams. They'd even gotten to be the victims in the story, the innocent parties hurt by the crazy woman who'd written mean things about them. But I was just getting started. I opened my laptop and started a new document. If they wanted to see what happened when you underestimated Helen Carter, I was happy to show them. After all, writers don't just observe life, we shape it, and I'd become very good at crafting narratives that people couldn't ignore. The cursor blinked at me, waiting. This time, I knew exactly what to write. Writers don't return home for closure. We return for material. The rental house on Oak Street was perfect for my purposes, close enough to observe the neighborhood dynamics, far enough away to avoid immediate recognition. It was a modest colonial owned by a retired couple who'd moved to Florida and were happy to rent to a quiet writer lady for 6 months. They'd even left behind some furniture and a decent internet connection, which was all I needed for the next phase of my research. I'd told my new neighbors I was working on a sequel to The Blueprint and needed to immerse myself in suburban culture for authenticity. This was technically true, though I didn't mention that the sequel would be more of a live-action performance than a traditional novel. Within a week, I'd been absorbed into the social ecosystem of Maple Heights, like a virus disguised as medicine. The book club invited me to discuss contemporary women's fiction. The PTA asked me to speak at their fundraiser about following your dreams. The Neighborhood Watch Committee wanted my thoughts on improving community engagement. Everyone wanted to meet the famous author who'd grown up just a few streets away. They were fascinated by my transformation from invisible suburban wife to best-selling novelist, as if I'd performed some kind of magic trick they might learn to replicate. "It's so inspiring," gushed Sandra Kellerman at the coffee shop where the local moms gathered every Tuesday morning. "I always knew you had something special in you, even back when you were married to James." This was a complete lie. Sandra had barely acknowledged my existence during my 20 years as James's wife. But now that I was Helen Carter, author, she was eager to claim credit for recognizing my potential. "Thank you," I said, sipping my latte and making mental notes about the group dynamics. It's amazing how much clearer everything becomes once you step outside your old life and really look at it. "And James," added Patricia Morrison, leaning forward with the hungry expression of someone about to share particularly juicy gossip. "How is he handling all your success? It must be strange for him, seeing you become so visible." The other women leaned in, waiting for my response. This was what they'd really come for, not to celebrate my achievements, but to dissect the aftermath of my marriage's collapse. They wanted details about James's reaction to the book, about whether he'd tried to stop publication, about how it felt to expose our private life to public scrutiny. James is doing well, I said carefully. I understand he's very happy with his new business partner. Jennifer, isn't it? They seem like a perfect match. The table went quiet. These women knew exactly what James and Jennifer were to each other, but no one had been brave enough to say it out loud. They'd all been protecting James's reputation, or maybe just avoiding the awkwardness of acknowledging that their neighbor was living with his much younger girlfriend in a house that looked suspiciously like the one he'd shared with his wife. Yes, well, Patricia said finally. Jennifer is very energetic. She's brought a lot of new ideas to the firm. I'm sure she has, I replied, and let the silence stretch just long enough to make everyone uncomfortable. After the coffee meeting, I drove slowly through the old neighborhood, cataloguing changes. The Hendersons had installed a new fence. The Johnsons had repainted their shutters. And there, at the end of Elm Street, was the house James had built for Jennifer. It was even more unsettling in person than it had been in the real estate photos. Not just similar to my old house, but almost identical. Same roofline, same front porch, same landscaping style. The only significant difference was the color. Jennifer's house was painted a soft blue instead of the cream James and I had chosen. It was like looking at an alternate version of my life, one where I'd been digitally erased and replaced with a younger, more attractive model. I parked across the street and watched the house for an hour, taking notes about the routine. Jennifer left for work at 8:30 in a white BMW. James followed 20 minutes later in the same black Mercedes he'd driven throughout our marriage. They returned together around 6 how, usually carrying takeout bags from expensive restaurants. The house had a security system. I could see the sensors on the windows and the company sticker by the front door. But the backyard was accessible through a gate that didn't appear to be alarmed. The neighbors on either side were elderly and went to bed early. The streetlights were positioned to create convenient shadows. Not that I was planning anything illegal, of course. I was just a writer doing research, observing the natural habitat of my subjects. On my third night of surveillance, I decided to get a closer look. I waited until after midnight, when the neighborhood was dark and quiet, then walked casually down the street like someone out for a late stroll. The gate to Jennifer's backyard was unlocked, a security oversight that James would have never tolerated when we were married. The backyard was a masterpiece of landscape design, with professional lighting that highlighted carefully chosen plants and a stone patio that probably cost more than most people's cars. Through the kitchen window, I could see the granite countertops and custom cabinets that were nearly identical to the ones in my former home. They'd even positioned the breakfast table in the same spot where James and I used to eat our silent morning meals. I was so absorbed in comparing the layout to my memories that I almost missed the sound of footsteps on the front porch. Car doors slammed, and I heard James's voice carrying across the yard. I told you, the Morrison project is going to require overtime. We can't afford any delays. Jennifer's response was muffled, but her tone was sharp. They were arguing about something, their voices getting louder as they approached the front door. I crept closer to the house, staying in the shadows cast by an ornamental tree that James had probably chosen for exactly this purpose. Through the living room window, I could see them clearly for the first time since I'd left. James looked older, more tired than I remembered. His hair had gone completely grey, and he'd developed the kind of permanent frown that comes from chronic stress. Jennifer, on the other hand, looked exactly like the polished professional from her Instagram photos, even at midnight, after what appeared to be a difficult evening. "You're being paranoid," she was saying, kicking off heels that probably cost more than my monthly rent. "So what if Helen wrote a book about her marriage? Nobody's going to connect it to us." James loosened his tie with the same mechanical gesture I'd watched him perform thousands of times. 3 clients have asked me about it directly. The Hendersons wanted to know if the husband in the book was based on me. Patricia Morrison actually brought a copy to our meeting and asked me to sign it. That's not our problem. That's Helen's problem for writing it in the first place. Is it? James turned to face her, and I could see the exhaustion in his posture. Because I'm starting to think we have a bigger problem than bad publicity. Jennifer froze in the middle of removing her earrings. What do you mean? I mean, Helen didn't just write a book, Jennifer. She declared war. And if you think she's done fighting, you don't know her at all. I smiled in the darkness, pressed against the side of the house I'd helped design through 20 years of marriage. James was right about one thing. I wasn't done fighting. But he was wrong about everything else. This wasn't Helen's problem anymore. It was theirs. A motion sensor light suddenly blazed to life, flooding the backyard with harsh white illumination. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs, as James appeared at the kitchen window, looking directly toward where I was standing. For a moment that lasted forever, we stared at each other through the glass. His face went through a series of expressions: surprise, recognition, and something that might have been fear. Then Jennifer appeared beside him, following his gaze to where I stood exposed in their backyard, like a burglar caught in the act. "Is that—" she began. I didn't wait to hear the rest. I turned and walked calmly toward the gate, my footsteps echoing on the stone patio. Behind me, I heard the back door open and James's voice calling my name, but I didn't look back. Let them wonder what I'd been doing there. Let them worry about what I'd seen and heard. Let them lie awake at night wondering what the crazy ex-wife was planning next. Reputation is just architecture built on whispers. I was about to turn his into rubble. The first crack in James's carefully constructed new life appeared on a Tuesday morning, courtesy of the Maple Heights Community Facebook page. Someone had posted a photo of his black Mercedes in the parking lot of the Riverside Motel, an establishment that rented rooms by the hour and had been the subject of numerous neighborhood complaints about unsavory activities. The photo was grainy, clearly taken from a distance, but the license plate was visible. The caption read, "Interesting choice of meeting location for our award-winning local architect. Hope it's just a business consultation." Within hours, the post had dozens of comments ranging from confused to scandalized. I watched the digital wildfire spread from my laptop at the coffee shop, sipping my latte, while neighbors I'd known for decades dissected James's reputation in real time. Of course, James had never been to the Riverside Motel. I knew this because I'd taken the photo myself, using a telephoto lens and careful positioning to make it appear his car was in their parking lot, when it was actually at the legitimate business next door. A simple matter of angles and perspective, skills I'd learned during my brief photography phase, back when I was still trying to find creative outlets that James might respect. The beauty of social media destruction is its organic nature. Once you plant the seed of doubt, the community waters it for you. "I always thought there was something off about that Jennifer woman," wrote Patricia Morrison, apparently forgetting that she'd been singing Jennifer's praises just weeks earlier. "Maybe Helen Carter knew more than she was letting on in that book," added Sandra Kellerman, suddenly repositioning herself as my defender rather than my critic. By afternoon, the post had been shared to 3 other local Facebook groups and screenshot for Instagram stories. James's reputation, built over decades of careful networking and community involvement, was developing hairline fractures that would be impossible to repair completely. But I was just getting started. The second phase of my campaign required more direct action. I waited until Thursday evening, when James and Jennifer had their standing reservation at Chez Laurent, the French restaurant where they conducted their weekly business meetings. I'd learned their schedule through careful observation and strategic conversations with mutual acquaintances. His Mercedes was parked in its usual spot behind the restaurant, in the poorly lit area where the staff dumped their cigarette butts and the dumpster attracted raccoons. James had always been careless about parking, confident that his expensive car and prominent position in the community provided adequate protection. That confidence was about to cost him. I dressed in black and brought a small toolkit, a bag of sugar, a set of keys I'd had made from memory, and a few other items that would create maximum inconvenience with minimum legal risk. The sugar went into the gas tank, an old trick that would cause expensive engine problems without technically constituting major vandalism. The keys allowed me to access the interior, where I could adjust a few settings and leave some subtle calling cards. The final touch was artistic. I used Jennifer's lipstick, conveniently left in the console, to write "liar" across the windshield in elegant script. Not my most sophisticated work, but sometimes the direct approach is most effective. I was walking back to my car when I heard Jennifer's voice echoing from the restaurant's back entrance. "Told you we should have valet parked," she was saying, her heels clicking on the asphalt as she and James approached his car. I ducked behind a neighboring vehicle and watched as they discovered my handiwork. James's reaction was everything I'd hoped for. He stood frozen beside his vandalized car, his face cycling through disbelief, rage, and something that looked like genuine fear. Jennifer, meanwhile, had launched into a stream of profanity that would have impressed a construction worker. "She's completely lost her mind," Jennifer said, examining the lipstick message. "This is harassment. We should call the police." "And tell them what?" James's voice was tight with controlled panic. "That my ex-wife is playing pranks on me. They'll laugh us out of the station." "This isn't a prank, James. This is psychotic behavior." I smiled in the darkness. If Jennifer thought lipstick on a windshield was psychotic, she was going to love what came next. The confrontation I'd been planning happened by accident, which made it even more satisfying. I was leaving the grocery store on Saturday morning when I spotted Jennifer's white BMW in the parking lot. She was loading bags into her trunk, wearing yoga clothes, and the kind of effortless ponytail that required expensive products and professional styling. I could have avoided her. Should have, probably, if I'd wanted to maintain the illusion that I was a stable, mature woman who'd moved on from her failed marriage. But seeing her there, living the life that should have been mine, wearing the confidence that I'd lost somewhere between PTA meetings and dinner parties, where I'd smiled and nodded and slowly disappeared, something inside me snapped. "Jennifer," I called out, pushing my cart in her direction. "What a lovely surprise." She turned, and I saw the exact moment she recognized me. Her face went pale beneath her carefully applied makeup, and she took an involuntary step backward. "Helen, I didn't expect to see you here." "I live here now," I said pleasantly. "Just a few streets over from you, actually. I love what James did with your house, by the way. So creative, building an exact replica of our old home. Most men would have tried something original, but James always did prefer to stick with proven designs." Jennifer's grip tightened on her car keys. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you do. The granite countertops, the custom cabinets, even the breakfast nook positioned to catch the morning light. He built you the same house we shared for 20 years, just with better furniture and a younger woman to go with it." "You're being ridiculous." "Am I?" I moved closer, close enough to see the fear in her carefully made-up eyes. "Tell me, Jennifer, when you're sitting at that breakfast table in the morning, do you ever wonder about the woman who sat there before you? Do you think about how she felt when she realized she was being replaced by someone who brought fresh energy to her husband's life? James and I are business partners. Whatever problems you had in your marriage—" "Problems?" I laughed, a sound that came out sharper than I'd intended. "The only problem with my marriage was that I didn't realize I was married to a man who saw me as a rough draft. Someone to practice on until he figured out what he really wanted." Jennifer glanced around the parking lot, probably hoping someone would intervene or at least witness whatever she thought I might do next. But it was early on a Saturday morning, and most of suburbia was still sleeping off their Friday night wine consumption. "You need help," she said finally. "This obsession with James, with us, it's not healthy." "You're right," I agreed. "It's not healthy at all. But you know what's really unhealthy? Building your entire life on someone else's foundation and pretending you created something original. You're living in a house designed for another woman, sleeping with a man who spent 25 years practicing on someone else, running a business built on relationships he developed while married to me. I leaned closer, close enough to smell her expensive perfume and see the small lines around her eyes that no amount of makeup could completely hide. You built your life on my leftovers, Jennifer. How's the foundation holding up? She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Instead, she fumbled with her car keys, dropped her purse, and scrambled to collect the contents that scattered across the asphalt. Lipstick, breath mints, business cards, and a small bottle of prescription anxiety medication that she tried to palm before I could see the label. Too late. Xanax? I asked sweetly. That's interesting. James always said he preferred women who could handle stress naturally. I guess everyone has their breaking point. Jennifer straightened up, clutching her purse like a shield. Stay away from us, Helen. I mean it. If you come near our house again, if you vandalize James's car again, I'll call the police. You do that, I said, backing away with my hands raised in mock surrender. And while you're at it, maybe ask James to tell you about the time he had our neighbor's dog put down because it barked too much, or about how he convinced his first business partner to sell his share of the firm for half what it was worth. James has such interesting stories about the people who got in his way. I turned and walked toward my car, leaving Jennifer standing in the parking lot with her mouth open and her anxiety medication clutched in her trembling hand. Behind me, I heard her car door slam and her engine start with more force than necessary. She peeled out of the parking lot like someone fleeing a crime scene, which, in a way, she was. By Monday morning, the story of our parking lot encounter had spread through the neighborhood gossip network like spilled wine through white carpet. The details got more dramatic with each telling. I threatened her, screamed at her, followed her home, depending on who was doing the talking. My phone rang at 10 a.m. sharp. Lily's name appeared on the screen and I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won, as it always did. Mom. Her voice was tight with something between anger and desperation. Dad says you're ruining us. He says you're harassing Jennifer and vandalizing his car and acting like a crazy person. Is that what he says? Are you denying it? I considered my response carefully. Lily was 23 years old enough to understand that most stories have more than one side, but young enough to still believe that her parents were fundamentally good people who'd simply grown apart. I'm editing, I said finally. What does that mean? It means your father spent 25 years writing a story about our family that made him the hero and me the supporting character. Now I'm revising the narrative to be more accurate. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I wondered if she'd hung up. Lily? I'm getting married, she said abruptly. What? Next month. To David. We were going to wait until next year, but with everything that's happening, we decided to move up the timeline. David was the marketing executive she'd been dating for 2 years, a perfectly nice man who treated her well and had James's approval. Under normal circumstances, I would have been thrilled. Congratulations, I said carefully. That's wonderful news. I want you there, Mom, at the wedding, but I need you to promise me something. What? Promise me you'll behave. No drama, no scenes, no... Whatever this is you're doing to Dad and Jennifer. Just be my mother for one day. Can you do that? I looked out my window at the suburban street where I'd been conducting my research, where neighbors were going about their normal lives, while I plotted the destruction of my ex-husband's reputation. In a few hours, I'd be back at my laptop, writing the sequel to The Blueprint that would expose even more of James's carefully hidden flaws. But Lily was getting married. My daughter, who'd dismissed my dreams and supported her father's version of our family story, wanted me at her wedding. Of course, I said, I'll be there. And you'll behave? I'll be the perfect mother of the bride. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen and tried to imagine myself at Lily's wedding, smiling politely while James played the role of devoted father, while Jennifer stood beside him as his supportive partner, while everyone pretended that our family's implosion was just one of those unfortunate things that sometimes happen to good people. The invitation arrived 3 days later, heavy cardstock with elegant calligraphy that probably cost more than I used to spend on groceries in a month. Mr. and Mrs. James Carter request your presence, as if James was still married to someone who shared his name and his vision of perfect suburban life. I ran my finger over the embossed letters and smiled. Lily Carter was getting married. The daughter who'd once called me irrelevant now wanted me in the front row. I never could resist good theatre. The Riverside Country Club had been decorated within an inch of its life, transformed into the kind of wedding venue that appeared in magazines devoted to conspicuous consumption. White roses and baby's breath draped every available surface. Crystal chandeliers cast romantic shadows across the dance floor, and a string quartet played classical arrangements that nobody under 60 recognized, but everyone agreed were elegant. It was exactly the kind of wedding James would have planned, tasteful, expensive, and designed to impress people whose opinions he valued more than his own family's happiness. I arrived fashionably late, wearing a navy blue dress that struck the perfect balance between supportive mother and successful author who'd moved on with her life. My hair had been professionally styled for the occasion, and I'd invested in the kind of makeup that looked natural, but required an hour and 3 YouTube tutorials to achieve. The transformation was intentional. I wanted to look like the woman I'd become, not the one James had discarded. The murmur that rippled through the assembled guests when I entered was everything I'd hoped for. Heads turned, conversations paused, and I could practically hear the mental calculations as people tried to reconcile the Helen Carter they remembered with the confident woman walking down the aisle. "Is that Helen?" I heard Patricia Morrison whisper to her husband. "She looks different." Different was one word for it. Dangerous might have been more accurate. I took my seat in the front row, directly across the aisle from James and Jennifer. James looked distinguished in his tuxedo, his grey hair perfectly styled, and his smile fixed in place like a politician at a fundraiser. Jennifer, predictably, had chosen a dress that was just a shade too attention-grabbing for a wedding guest, her blonde hair swept into an elaborate updo that probably required architectural engineering. They made a handsome couple, I had to admit, the kind of people who looked like they belonged in a country club, who could make small talk about wine and real estate and the latest restaurant everyone was talking about. The kind of people who'd never experienced a moment of genuine uncertainty about their place in the world. That was about to change. The ceremony itself was lovely, if you enjoyed that sort of thing. Lily looked radiant in a dress that cost more than most people's cars, and David seemed genuinely happy to be marrying her. They exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promising to support each other's dreams and face life's challenges together. I wondered if they'd still believe in those promises in 25 years, when the dreams had been deferred and the challenges had worn them down into polite strangers sharing a breakfast table. But that was cynical, even for me. Maybe they'd do better than James and I had. Maybe they'd learned something from watching our marriage collapse in real time. The reception was where things got interesting. I'd positioned myself strategically at a table with some of James's business associates and their wives, people who knew me from the old days, but hadn't seen me since my transformation into a best-selling author. They were eager to hear about my success, to claim some reflected glory from knowing me back when. "We always knew you had it in you," lied Margaret Steinberg, whose husband had been trying to poach James's clients for years. "That book of yours was just brilliant, so insightful about suburban marriage." "Thank you," I said, sipping champagne that probably cost more per bottle than I used to spend on wine in a month. It's amazing what you can see clearly once you step outside a situation. "And James," added Robert Chen, Margaret's husband. "How did he react to being the inspiration for your protagonist?" The table went quiet. This was the question everyone wanted to ask, but no one had been brave enough to voice. They all knew the blueprint was about my marriage to James, but discussing it directly would require acknowledging that their friend and colleague had been publicly dissected by his ex-wife. James has been very supportive, I said with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. In fact, I should probably thank him publicly. And Jennifer, of course. They've both been such inspiration for my work. Before anyone could respond, I stood and walked toward the head table where the wedding party was seated. The DJ had just finished playing the father-daughter dance, and James was returning to his seat with the satisfied expression of a man who'd successfully performed his patriarchal duties. I intercepted him before he could sit down. "James," I said warmly, loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "Congratulations. Lily looks beautiful." He stiffened, his politician's smile faltering for just a moment. "Helen, thank you for coming. I wouldn't miss it. Our daughter's wedding is such an important milestone." I paused, looking around at the assembled guests who were pretending not to listen to our conversation. "I was just telling the Chens how grateful I am for all the inspiration you and Jennifer have provided for my writing. Without you two, I never would have had such rich material to work with." Jennifer appeared at James's elbow like a bodyguard responding to a threat. "Helen, this is Lily's day. Perhaps we could—" "Oh, absolutely," I agreed. "This is definitely Lily's day. I was just thinking how wonderful it is that she'll have such a different marriage than the one I had. She's learned so much from watching us, don't you think?" The conversations at the nearby tables had stopped entirely now. Everyone was watching our little drama unfold, waiting to see if the crazy ex-wife was going to cause a scene at her own daughter's wedding. I had no intention of disappointing them. "In fact," I continued, raising my voice just enough to carry to the next ring of tables, "I should probably make a toast. To thank everyone who made my literary success possible." Before James could stop me, I'd signaled the DJ and taken the microphone. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the country club's main dining room. "For those who don't know me, I'm Helen Carter, Lily's mother and the author of The Blueprint." A ripple of recognition went through the crowd. About half the guests had read my book, and the other half had heard enough gossip to know what it was about. I wanted to take a moment to thank some very special people who made my writing career possible. First, my ex-husband James, who taught me that the most interesting stories often hide behind the most perfect facades. James had gone pale, his hands gripping the edge of the table like he was trying to anchor himself. And of course, Jennifer Walsh, James's business partner, who showed me that sometimes the best way to appreciate what you had is to see someone else living your life with better furniture. The silence in the room was so complete, I could hear the ice clinking in people's drinks. "But most of all," I continued, looking directly at Lily, "I want to thank my daughter for inviting me here tonight, because watching her start her new life reminded me that it's never too late to rewrite your story. Sometimes the best chapters come after you think the book is over." I handed the microphone back to the DJ and returned to my table, where my dinner companions were staring at me with expressions ranging from horror to admiration. The rest of the reception passed in a blur of whispered conversations and sideways glances. I danced with David's father, made small talk with distant relatives, and watched as James and Jennifer huddled together at their table like generals planning a retreat. The gossip network was already working overtime. I could see clusters of guests sharing phones, probably looking up The Blueprint on Amazon or searching for news articles about James's firm. By tomorrow morning, everyone at this wedding would know exactly what I'd meant by my toast. James's reputation, already damaged by weeks of strategic rumors and social media speculation, was about to take a final, fatal hit. Not because of anything I'd done directly, but because I'd given his peers permission to discuss what they'd all been thinking privately. The Emperor's new clothes had been revealed as gossip and speculation, and now everyone could see him clearly. I was getting ready to leave when Lily appeared at my elbow. "Mom," she said quietly, "we need to talk." She led me to a quiet corner of the club's lobby, away from the reception noise and curious eyes. "What was that?" she asked. "What was what?" "That toast. That performance. You promised me you'd behave." I studied my daughter's face, looking for traces of the little girl who used to ask me to read her stories before bed, who used to believe I could do anything. She was beautiful in her wedding dress, radiant with happiness and champagne, but there was something harder in her eyes now, something that reminded me uncomfortably of James. "I did behave," I said finally. "I thank the people who helped make me successful. That's perfectly appropriate behavior for a mother of the bride." "You humiliated Dad and Jennifer." "Did I? I thought I was just being honest about how much they've contributed to my career." Lily's expression shifted, and for a moment she looked like she might cry. "I know what Dad did, Mom. I'm not stupid. I know about Jennifer, about how long they were together before you left. I know the book was about him." "Then why are you angry at me?" "Because," she stopped, struggling with words, "because you're supposed to be the grown-up. You're supposed to be better than this." The accusation hit harder than I'd expected. For months, I'd been telling myself that my campaign against James was about justice, about reclaiming my narrative, about refusing to be erased from my own life story. But looking at Lily in her wedding dress, seeing the disappointment in her eyes, I wondered if I'd simply become the villain in a different story. "You're right," I said quietly. "I'm sorry. This should have been about you, not about me settling old scores." Lily's expression softened slightly. "I just want my parents to be happy, Mom. Both of you. Is that too much to ask?" Before I could answer, James appeared in the lobby doorway. He looked older than he had even a few hours earlier, worn down by stress and public embarrassment. "Lily," he said, "your husband is looking for you. Something about the cake cutting." She glanced between us, torn between her new life and the wreckage of her old one. "Promise me you'll try to work this out," she said. "Both of you, for my sake, if not for your own." Then she was gone, rustling back toward her reception in a cloud of silk and tulle, leaving James and me alone in the country club lobby. We stood there for a long moment, two people who'd shared a life for 25 years and now could barely stand to be in the same room. "Are you satisfied?" he asked finally. "Are you?" He almost smiled at that. "Touché. I hear the firm is struggling," I said, not bothering to hide my satisfaction. "Something about clients questioning your judgment. You've been thorough, I'll give you that. The rumors, the social media campaign, tonight's little performance. Very professional. I learned from the best. You always were good at destroying people quietly, making it look like their own fault." James's composure finally cracked. "What did you want from me, Helen? What would have been enough? An apology? A bigger divorce settlement? What?" "I wanted you to see me," I said simply. "For 25 years, I wanted you to see me as something more than a supporting character in your life. But you never did. Even now, you think this is about money or revenge or some kind of breakdown. Isn't it?" I looked around the country club lobby, with its oil paintings of late members and its furniture designed to impress rather than comfort. This was James's world, had been our world, a place where success was measured in square footage and social status. "No," I said, "it's about editing. You wrote a story about our marriage that erased everything I contributed, everything I sacrificed, everything I was. You turned me into a footnote in my own life." I picked up my purse and headed toward the exit. I just rewrote the ending. As I stepped outside into the quiet night air, I realized I'd finally written the perfect ending. And this time, I didn't need an editor. The valet brought my car around, and I drove away from the country club, away from the reception, where my daughter was dancing with her new husband, away from the life I'd spent 50 years trying to perfect. Behind me, James and Jennifer would have to face the whispers and sideways glances, the questions about ethics and judgment, the slow erosion of a reputation that had taken decades to build. They'd have to live with the knowledge that everyone at that wedding now saw them clearly, saw the affair and the lies and the casual cruelty that had destroyed a 25-year marriage. But ahead of me was something I'd never had before, a story that was entirely my own, with no one else's approval required. I was Helen Carter, author, architect of my own narrative, and I'd finally learned the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to be forgotten,